My name is Eva Brettler, and my maiden name is Katz. And I was born in a region which you all heard of called Transylvania. And both my father and mother were also from the same region. My father was one of 10 children. My mother was one of 6 children, and they both came from a very religious background. My father became a printer. My mother became a hat maker, and she loved making me cute little outfits, occasionally with matching little hats. So you can imagine I was a little bit spoiled, and I was the only child. I'm about 4.5 years old. And we lived in a city called Kolozsvár, the Hungarian way, which was used, or Cluj, which is the current name. And my father comes home and he said, "I lost my job." I said, "Papa, last week they honored you as an outstanding worker. How can you lose your job?" And he said, "I lost my job because we are Jewish." I knew we were Jewish, but at that young age, that was extremely confusing. And my father had the foresight. He said, "Let's move to a region where people don't know us." We had a beautiful little apartment, painting, needle points hanging on the wall. We left everything behind. And we got on a train and we moved to Budapest, which is the capital of Hungary. The war was raging throughout Europe, and there was a tremendous shortage of apartments. So my parents had to sublease a room. In one room was our landlady, her name was Mrs. Gross, and in the other room was a single woman who became an SS woman. So you can see the diversity in one little apartment. Both my father and mother found jobs, and I was sent to a little nursery school. Some time passed, and my mother said, "We are so crowded. I want you to breathe a little. Let's go up and visit her mother, my maternal grandmother, so you can really breathe a little and enjoy life." And I was absolutely fascinated. They lived in a small village called Tasnard, the Hungarian version. And they were raising fruits, vegetables right behind their home, and I could go and pick it. And the neighbor next door to us had cows. And I was invited, by now I'm 7 years old, to milk a cow. I mean, that's really fascinating coming from a big city. And I remember my grandmother baking bread. And the whole house took over the delicious aroma. And she always had a small little piece ready for me before it was cut up. When there was tremendous banging on the door, I got scared. I hid behind my grandmother. 2 Hungarian policemen came in, and they said, "You have a half an hour, collect your belongings. We are taking you to a labor camp." My grandmother turned to me and she said, "Your name is not on the list. I want you to hide in the cornfield," which was behind their home. "And when it becomes dark, you go over to the neighbor's house and they will get message to your parents." I said, "Grandma, I'm just 7 years old. You shouldn't leave me alone. Let me come with you." She said, "For a change, don't argue, but listen." She made sure I was well hidden. And I watched as my grandmother and my youngest aunt, who was home at the time, her name was Iboya, joined the other people who walked toward the railroad station. When it became semi-dark, I came out from my hiding place, and out of nowhere a group of people surrounded me. From their clothes, I recognized they were gypsies. And I was told at early age on that you have to be very careful because gypsies love to steal young children. So I pretended my grandma was inside, and I started to yell, "Grandma, Grandma, come on out. These people don't want to leave me alone." And they left me. I felt so empowered. I fooled them and they didn't take me. I did walk over to the neighbor's house, and I have no concept how much time lapsed. But eventually my father arrived. My father was serving in a labor camp, and he had to wear a yellow star. I did not have one. And he prepared me to go back to Budapest. He said, "Pretend you don't know me, walk parallel with me, and we will get to the railroad station." I haven't seen my father for a long time. I was skipping, singing, tried to entertain him, when 2 Hungarian policemen arrested my father. I kept going for a while, and then I turned around. The next day when my father came to get me, you could see he was very, very badly beaten. There were scars on his face, on his arm, but he had a piece of paper stating that they kept him overnight. And he was very confident that this time we will make it. And he was right. We did make it to the railroad station. When we got there, 2 young Aerocross. Aerocross is similar like SS, except it's a Hungarian version. And they yelled at my father, "You dirty Jew, you cannot go inside the train. You will have to wait until the train is filled, and then you have to be on the open platform." My father said, "I understand." He looked around trying to find somebody who would watch me. And he found a young woman with a small child and approached her and begged her, "You as a mother, I beg you, could you please take care of my daughter? She's a very good girl. She will behave." And this lady was so courageous, because watching a Jewish child, she could have been arrested. The train was filled with soldiers, and I was so petrified when this person tried to give me something. I just couldn't move, eat anything. I was so scared. When we arrived to Budapest, they let us off first, and they held my father back. And the minute I got off, I started to run. Apparently, I knew how to get home. I just wanted my mother to hold on to me. My father went back the same day. He was a little angry at me, and I understood. On March 19, 1944, Hungary was invaded by the Germans. It was very late during the war, but in record time, they established the ghetto, and the place where we lived, Jews couldn't live there anymore. It wasn't part of the ghetto. My mother didn't want to go into the ghetto. By the way, the ghetto was established by April 1st. The reason they could do it so quickly, because the local population collaborated with the Germans to the highest degree. My mother somehow got papers to a Swiss safe house. We stayed there for a while until the local government no longer accepted it. Then she got papers to a Swedish safe house. The same thing happened there. After a short time later, they closed it down. And as they were closing it down, my mother took me. I was pretty small for my age. And she put me in a wicker basket, and she put that on top of her furniture with blankets over me. And she said, "You have to stay there until I come and get you." It was a long time later till she came to get me. And I was soaking wet for multiple reasons. I'm almost 8 years old, a little over 7.5. I was so embarrassed. My mother helped me to change my clothes. And I asked her, "Mama, where did you hide?" She said, "I was hiding in the elevator shaft." I said, "Oh my God, weren't you afraid you would fall?" She says, "No, I knew I had to come and get you." We collected some of our belongings. It was semi-dark outside. And as we were ready to exit the safe house, a policeman who was standing guard there looked at my mother and said, "Move very, very quickly. I don't see you." So he did save us. We started to walk, and my mother turned to me. I became her little confidant. And she asked me, "Where do you think we should go? We cannot be on the street. There is a curfew." And as we were walking, she remembered that the SS woman's brother lived on the outskirts of Budapest. And we did visit him before. And she decided to go to his place. As we were walking, my mother said, "I have a real big surprise for you. You will have a new last name." My new last name became Eva Nagy. And I'm teaching you a Hungarian word. Nagy in Hungarian means big. And my mama said, "Now you really have to act like a big girl. Your last name says it also." And I never attended school before the war. And my mother said, "With your new name, I want you to practice. I will try to enroll you to school tomorrow." We ended up going to this man's place, and he did let us in. And next day was beautiful, sunny. It was in September. And she took me to school. And under my fictitious name, I was accepted. I was so excited I will be going to school. And she even found a new place where we could stay. But she decided to go back for the few belongings we left with this man. And just as we were ready to knock on his door, from the side, 2 policemen stepped out. They knew our real name. We were arrested, first taken to a police station. From there, we were taken to a brick factory, which was on the outskirts of Budapest. And there were a lot of people there. Most people had with them some walking shoes, additional clothes. All we had the light summer clothes, what we were wearing. And we started on the march toward Germany. The march was very, very difficult. And my mother was wearing heels because she wanted to make a nice impression when she enrolled me to school. And it was very hard on her too, and on me. Every so often they put the young children on a horse-drawn wagon. And in the evening they set up a place when we arrived to our temporary destination, where we were reunited with the people we were separated from. One day my mother's feet were so bloody and it was hurting so bad. And as she took me to the wagon, she begged, could I please come on the wagon with my daughter? They put me on. They pushed my mother away. Short time later, we heard shots. And when the evening came and we arrived to our temporary destination, the place which was set up, every time the door opened, I was hoping my mama is coming. It never happened. I'm not quite 8 years old yet. I started to cry. The lady who was coordinating things there, I hope your mother escaped. I'm going to watch you until she comes back. I remember the bombing around us was so heavy that night, and the whole sky was lighted up. I was so scared. This lady held on to me. Eventually we were pushed into a cattle wagon. The cattle wagon was filled to the maximum. You couldn't even sit down. And when they opened up the cattle wagon, we were told we arrived to a camp called Ravensbrück. Ravensbrück was a women's camp, and over 4/5 of the population perished there. They called it a few names as we were coming out down from the cattle wagon. And one of them was the lovely lady who stepped in to watch me. And she tried to pull my hand with hers, but they didn't let her. She was half Jewish, and they gave her a different assignment. They ordered us to give up all our personal belongings. I had absolutely nothing except a little ring which I got for my 7th birthday. I pulled up the ring and I put it under my tongue. I was so desperate to have something that connected me with my family. We were pushed into a big room where they made us undress. I grew up in a religious family. To be naked was something shameful. I put my hands front of me. An SS woman hit my hand with a whip, and I dropped them very quickly. They shaved my hair. They gave us, and they sprayed us with disinfectant. I have very light skin, and it was burning me, burning my body all over. They gave us pajama-looking clothes, stripe. It was much too big on me, including the wooden shoes that I got. And then they ordered us out from the building. I stood in the corner. An older lady noticed me standing there, and she said, "Young girl, how come you don't go to your barrack?" I said, "I don't belong to anyone. I am 8 years old." I forgot to mention, we arrived to Ravensbrück. It was January 1945. She said, "From now on you will belong to me, and call me Tanti." Tanti means like an aunt. She said, "You look just like one of my nieces." She and I ended up in a barrack. The barrack had bunk beds, 3 in a row. There were no mattresses, no covers, no pillows. And as I said, we arrived in January, and that part of the country is extremely cold in January. She and I cuddled up next to each other. She had her hands around me all the time. Our daily routine was basically walking around the campground. And one night as we went to sleep, I heard a baby cry. It was so unusual, there were no babies in the barrack. The other woman in the barrack said the baby was born during the night, and you have to keep it a secret. We are going to hide both the mother and the baby. I turned to my Tanti and I asked her, "Do you think I will ever become a mother? I'm a little over 8 years old now. Do you think I will ever have children?" She said, "You have to promise me you never, never give up hope. And keep on praying. And I will teach you a few new prayers today too." The Soviet army was approaching the camp, and the camp was being liquidated. We were pushed back in the cattle wagon, and this time I ended up in Bergen-Belsen. The conditions were very, very bad in Ravensbrück, but I still remember getting rations, occasionally soup with a little vegetables or potatoes in it. The first thing we seen when we arrived to Bergen-Belsen were mountains of corpses. This time they assigned us to a barrack. It no longer had beds. We were sleeping on the concrete floor, and next to me were gypsies, and I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The daily routine was basically the same. We were walking around the campground, and one day as we were walking around, one of the women noticed that behind the kitchen area there was a big pile of potato peels. And she said, "Look, there is an opening under the wire fence. We will push you under. Bring us out some potato peels." Well, I listened. I got a little scratched up, but I did bring out the potato peels. They grabbed it from me so quickly, I never had a chance to put a bite in my mouth. The same thing the second time. The third time they pushed me under, I sat there and ate potato peels before I brought out some additional one. I learned. One day there was so much whispering going on. and I overheard that a truckload of children were saved. These children were the so-called diamond children, and they were going to collect ransom for them. And a lovely lady by the name of Luba, she saved all 54 children. And I kind of wanted to be together with children, but I couldn't get up and go from one barrack to the next. But hearing about this lady was just so moving. It was so cold, and my feet got so badly frozen. And one day, it was hurting so bad, I decided I need to go to the clinic. And I'm ready to get out from my barrack. And a woman said, "Where do you think you are going?" I said, "Look at my feet, it's soft. It hurts so bad. It's hurting so much." She said, "Just sit down." She lifted some garment and tore off some material and bandaged my feet. She wrapped it up. She said, "If you go to the clinic, you will never come back. And I don't want you to give up so quickly." Inside the barrack, it was totally infested with all kinds of bugs. And as I mentioned before, I have very light skin, and the bugs love to target me. So I kind of sneaked out from the barrack. It was beautiful, sunny, and the sun was blinding me. There was a strange sun next to me. I stood extremely still, and somebody picked me up, and I could see tears in the man's eyes. He put me down, reached in his pocket, and gave me a chocolate bar. It was April 15, 1945, and we were liberated by the British. And this lovely young soldier gave me his chocolate bar, which I ate all by myself. A few days later, I became so sick. I kind of blamed it that I didn't share the chocolate with anyone else. And I was shaking, I had high fever. And they were leading me to the hospital which the British established. And just as I'm ready to go in, our landlady, Mrs. Gross, sees me. And she said, "Eva, I'm going to wait for you and take you back to Budapest." I said, "Thank you, Mrs. Gross, but I'm never going back to Budapest again. I'm pretty sure my mother was killed, and probably so was my father. I have a chance to go to Sweden, and there I'm going to live in the king's castle." Well, Mrs. Gross said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm very sure." I came down with typhus, and many people died of typhus after the camp was liberated. I was one of the fortunate ones. And you probably heard that Anne Frank unfortunately died from typhus before the camp was liberated. Well, I got well, and on August 1945, I arrived to Sweden. Guess what? They didn't take me to the king's castle. I was taken to an orphanage, and in that orphanage was this lovely lady, Luba, and she became like all of our mothers. Most of the children I was together with were Polish. I had to learn how to speak Polish, Swedish, and German, and I forgot how to speak Hungarian. I kind of became, and the first time I started to attend school there, I kind of became mischievous. And one day I'm summoned into the principal's office. I tried to remember what did I do so bad that I have to go all the way to the principal. And when I go in, the principal tells me, "Your father survived. And through the International Red Cross, and my father connected with Mrs. Gross, and Mrs. Gross told my father that I went to Sweden." So in January 1947, I flew the first time on a plane, and I went to Prague, and from Prague with a train, I arrived to Budapest. My father spoke several languages, so communicating wasn't that difficult with him. And he informed me, "I have a new mother and a new little brother." Chronologically, I just turned 10, so I presume you can consider me as a little girl. But world experience-wise, I was quite a bit older. And my new mother didn't know how to speak any other languages beside Hungarian, so we had difficulty communicating, among other things. I was enrolled to a religious school, and the first day I attended, I went to school from the principal's office. The teacher was supposed to lead me to my classroom, and he had to make a quick stop somewhere, and he pointed, "Go into the classroom." I entered the classroom, and they were saying their morning prayers, and I found the empty seat. I put my backpack down, and I noticed there are all boys there. And in the religious school, boys and girls have separate classrooms. When they finish with the prayer, the teacher turns to me and says, "Young girl, what do you think you're doing here?" I answered him in German. I understood Hungarian, but I couldn't utter the words. I said, "Can't you see I came to learn?" But I talked to him in German. So the whole school found out that a young girl started school who forgot how to speak Hungarian, and she was in the camps. So a lot of people came over to the parents' house with pictures, wanting to know if I recognize any of them. Of course I didn't. They cried. I did cry with them. I picked up Hungarian in record time, and I forgot all the other languages. I became a very good student until the communist government decided that a religious school is no longer accepted, and the school was closed down. So I ended up going to public school in our neighborhood, and I encountered tremendous amount of anti-Semitism from some of the teachers. So my grades went down. When I finished 8th grade, which was mandatory those days, they called the family council, and they decided, since I'm not such a good student, I should learn a trade. So at age 14 and a half, I started to work in an assembly line. I realized that that's not exactly what I would like to do. And all my friends went to gymnasium. And I looked around and I found a technical school. And in order to apply for the technical school, you had to pass a summer entrance and you had to attend classes. So I signed up. I figured I'm good in math, I will be okay in chemistry. And I really excelled, and the school accepted me. But the factory where I worked said that I'm not entitled, I'm not a member of the party. But the school fought for me. And I ended up working full-time and going at night school, studying chemistry. On October 1956, the Hungarian Revolution broke out. And during that revolution, tremendous chaos surfaced. And I told my parents, I'm leaving Hungary. I took with me my Red Cross certificate, which I think I have with me. And I crossed the border between Hungary to Austria in a city called Bősárkány. And translating it, it means it's full of mud. And I was full of mud. As I crossed, my legs were totally in the mud. But I did make it over, and the Red Cross was driving around and picked us up when we crossed to Austria. I registered with an agency called HIAS, and they wanted to make sure I'm really Jewish. They gave me a prayer book, and I knew how to read it. And President Eisenhower had a special program for people who studied science. And I was among the first ones to be admitted to the United States. I actually, because I did study science, and I actually got my green card on the boat before I even landed in New Jersey, where I ended up going to Camp Kilmer. They kept us there for a while, making sure we don't bring anything in. And my new mother had a brother who lived in Venice, and I ended up being picked up by them. And those days when you arrived on the plane, you could walk up and meet the people who arrived. And I had probably 20-some people waiting and cheering me, who I never met. And they were so exceptionally good to me. My parents arrived a short time later. On a blind date, I met another Holocaust survivor. 4 weeks later, he proposed. 4 weeks later, we got married. And the dream of starting a family became a reality. We had our first child after 1 year being married, and we had 4 children. My late husband encouraged me to go back to school. First, I went to community college, Santa Monica City College. Then I transferred to UCLA, where I ended up getting a degree in psychology. And I worked through a friend of mine, introduced me to Jewish Family Service. And at first I worked as a volunteer, and then they offered me the same day 2 different jobs. When I came back from the camps, when I came back to my parents, they told me, don't talk about what happened in the past. My late husband had the same idea. He said, let's not talk about what happened during the war. So I never really talked about it. The first time, through a friend, I met Dr. Sarah Moscovich, and I was sitting next to her at dinner, and she said, I love to interview you. I said, thank you, but I really am not interested. And she said, I'm starting a support group. And that support group will have people just like you who were all children during the Holocaust. Well, this was the first time we got a voice as survivors. And we really became like each other's siblings. It was so, so meaningful. And a few years ago, this group of people decided to put out a story, how we survived. And the book has my late husband's story and my story. And that book, really, the first time we opened up to the community also. I started to speak in 2007 officially. I went to an international child survivor conference, which was in Israel. And for the first time, I wrote down how my grandmother was taken. And I was so emotional. Instead of attending another workshop, I looked around and I noticed a blackboard. And people put messages up on that blackboard, and I put up a message. I'm looking for someone who was liberated in Bergen-Belsen and ended up going to Sweden. If you happen to be here, could you please contact me? And this lady, her name is Rena Quinn, contacted me. She said, I just came back from Germany, and I have a list of people who were liberated in Bergen-Belsen, and her name was in it and my name. And she and I ended up going on the same ship to Sweden. So the connection was absolutely amazing. And recently I went to other child survivor conference and I contacted her again. So we did keep in touch via email and WhatsApp. The reason for me to share my story is for multi-reasons. One of them, so many people claim the Holocaust never happened. It's quite different when you read the tremendous numbers on paper, but when you hear first-hand story, I usually feel the connection I connect with the students and the public. So I'm looking at you to be my future ambassadors to make sure that the memory of our loved ones is never forgotten. I have been extremely fortunate. I met Elie Wiesel several times. And he states that every Holocaust survivor's obligation is to share their story with the next generation so you can carry on. The other reason I really want to put tremendous emphasis that I couldn't have survived as a little 8-year-old girl without the compassion of other people who reached out and help me. I make a point to go out in the community and make a little difference. The biggest emphasis I like to usually put on is on education. Education is one thing that nobody can take away from you. And just currently, I was asked to speak at Yom HaShoah here at the park. And one of my grandchildren, I mentioned I have 4 children, I'm very lucky. I have grandchildren, and one of my grandsons, who just graduated from high school, was my co-speaker at the event. My usual request is when you go home, you let your loved ones know how much they mean to you. Because the little girl in me is still missing her mama. I hope I gave you a little background that you can get something from it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. So going back to the beginning of your story about your family, do you remember celebrating holidays with your family, and what did they look like? Also birthdays, if you can.
Well, you have a picture of my mother and father, don't you?
We'll get a photo.
Oh, you will get it later. Both my father and mother came from extremely religious family. So we celebrated all the holidays, and I remember being invited to my grandparents' house. And my grandmother in a city called Satmar, which is pretty well known. There were some famous rabbis who came from there. And my grandmother was just so amazing the way she cooked and kept the whole family together. In both places, the grandmothers were very, very strong individuals. And I do remember the holidays, and that meant so much to me. You know, first of all, you got some new clothes on the holidays, and the foods and everything were just exceptionally meaningful.
Wonderful. So what was...
Speak up a little.
Oh, sorry. What was your community like, and before you were taken, did you have any non-Jewish friends?
It was, you know, a lot of transition. I was till a young age in Kolozsvár. And when we moved to Budapest, I did have in the apartment building where we lived, there were both Jewish and non-Jewish tenants there. And I befriended people close to my age. And it was a multi-level apartment building. And the kids like to run around and do different, and yes, I did have non-Jewish friends too.
You said that in 1944, when Hungary was invaded, the ghetto was established very quickly within a month. And
Less than a month.
Less than a month. And the local population helped establish it. So do you remember experiencing any form of anti-Semitism before?
My grandfather on my mother's side, he was born in a region which belonged to Czechoslovakia at that time. And he was considered not an accepted Hungarian person, and he had to go in hiding. And he had beard and sideburn peyote, and he came to visit us, and they beat him up the kids on the street. And that was the first time I seen a family member. That was before the Germans actually came in. So the Hungarians weren't, they used to say that they sucked in with their mother's milk anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, from early age on, you kind of walked very cautiously next to a person who wasn't Jewish, because you didn't know how they would respond to you when they knew that you were Jewish. And for a short time, you know, my mother made me put on a, how you say, a cross, you know, when we went by, you know, before, and she made sure that I do it the right way, so they won't take us in. But being from early age on, both my father and mother encountered anti-Semitism. And the bleeding I seen the first time on my grandfather.
You said that your mother gave you false names, the last name of Nudge, correct?
It's spelled N-A-G-Y.
N-A-G-Y. And you were wearing a cross for a short period of time. So how did those two things impact your religious identity?
My name, my fictitious name I had for a day.
Okay.
So unfortunately, and I never attended school, because the same day my mother enrolled me to school, we were arrested. So I never really had an experience to play non-Jew, because we were arrested right away. And so unfortunately, and I didn't have a cross on. I just, you know, when I went by a church, they asked me, my mother asked me to put the cross on me, because it was a Catholic way of doing it.
You also said that, I think before this, you were in a Swiss and then Swedish safe house, correct? So did you have any other contact with the underground, and were you hidden anywhere else?
Not really. And the funny thing was, I went back with several of my kids to Hungary. And it was still under the communist era when I went back with my daughter. And we met, it was after being liberated. And the person, I was trying to tell them some story, and he kind of did like this, that I should not talk. And then we went outside, and he said, you have to be very careful. They are listening to everything what you say. And my daughter and I went up to our room where we were staying, in the hotel room, and behind the mirror we seen some bugs. So I don't know if they had it during the, before the, the communist era, but it was continuously, you kind of walked tiptoed, because you were continuously afraid that people are listening to what you are saying, and you can be. And many children accidentally said something, and that's how the parents were discovered.
While you were held in Ravensburg or Bergen-Belsen, what was your greatest asset and your greatest liability?
I think to be able to lean on somebody from early age on, that was so, so meaningful. And I forgot to mention the lady who became my tante, unfortunately died in Ravensbrück. and then other kind strangers stepped in to watch me. But not being alone, and I think, you know, nowadays you can have a mantra and you can meditate. My form of meditation from early age on was trying to say some of the prayers I learned and repeating it and kind of visualize the people who I cared for. And that kind of saved a little my sanity. I didn't realize at the time, but in retrospect I realized. And you know, there were certain prayers I said over and over, and I kind of realized those prayers were my way of escaping what I was actually participating in. And I needed to find a hiding place out in the open.
Do you still continue doing
Yeah.
that?
I had a little problem with my late husband because unfortunately his father was killed the day the city was liberated. So, and he kind of blamed, how could God be silent of what was happening? For me, religion continuously was an important part of my life. As a young girl, I never ate anything that wasn't considered kosher. And as an adult, I adopted the same thing. I kept, you know, that religious custom was always important. And to some extent, I feel religion is my bridge to my past. Sorry. I practice Orthodox. I belong to an Orthodox temple. And I keep a kosher household. I don't enforce my values on everybody around me. On the other hand, I appreciate if they don't try to enforce their belief on me either. So in that respect, I had, from early age on, I had friends who weren't observant, and I could laugh and go to theater or whatever, you know, with them. But yeah, religion has been always a very, very important part of my life.
So with that in mind, did your religious identity or your practices fluctuate throughout your lifetime? Like while you were held in the camps, did your belief system change at all, or were you able to keep the same things in mind and keep your practices steady?
I think my luck was, number one, you have to realize, I've been told when I went to some international conferences, which I attend quite often, I was told that you really don't know what suffering means, because if you happen to come from Poland, the war started in 1939, September. For me, it started much later. And I happened to be much younger than that person. So I told that man who told me, you don't know what suffering is. I told him, excuse me. I said, I don't think you can measure the suffering. You can suffer if you are in hiding. You can suffer if you were in camp. And you cannot measure how long you suffered should make that fact. Some people managed. And I think from early age on, I think my mother kind of gave me the strength from early age on that, hey, you can accomplish what you want if you put your mind to it. So in that respect, I think I kept that. And I have been extremely fortunate that there were complete strangers who held on to that little girl. Because if you roll back the clock and you visualize yourself at age 8, how much can you do? Very, very limited. And when that book came out, and my youngest grandson at the time was 8 years old, and he knew how to read and everything, and he was reading it here at that museum. Believe it or not, for 1 week I lost it, because I looked at that little kid and I just had difficulty understanding how could I survive at that age.
So, because you mentioned the different experiences and what suffering means to different people, are you able to watch movies about World War II comfortably?
I do. And when Schindler's List came out, my daughter and my son-in-law said, we want you to come and see the film. And they held on to me. And they felt that that little girl that was the only child who was shown in color, that it reminded them so much of me. That's a little girl. I opened up a lot, and I do talk quite a bit about the Holocaust, and I do see some films. It doesn't mean that I won't shed a few tears here and there. And but I try to, whenever I see a Holocaust-related film, I try to hear the person, what they went through, and don't bring myself into it. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
How do you feel about the movie's portrayal of the Holocaust?
Movies, how they show how the Holocaust happened.
Mm-hmm.
But some are very well done, and some are, I feel that they didn't dig deep enough to understand, what was happening.
So, going back again, when you were liberated from Bergen-Belsen, correct? What was your initial reaction to the soldier that gave you chocolate?
I think all through the time, I was hoping that my mother would come. That was one of the things I had real difficulty understanding, that she loves me so much and she was so protective of me. How can she leave me alone? To some extent, I realized later on, another child survivor who went through similar experience, who told me, I felt deserted. And I didn't realize at the time that's what I was feeling, but to some extent, I couldn't believe that she would leave me alone. So that was, and I think from early age on, I had to learn how to blend in, not call attention to myself, and also how to survive, with not too much, light on me. So, and that was probably the other reason for so many years I really didn't talk about my experience. And some of my children had easier way to understand, what happened. On the other hand, I'm so proud of my children. My second son became a physician. I have 2 sons and 2 daughters. And my son has just come back from Jamaica a week ago, where he has gone for 10 years. And this year, his wife went with him, and before, his 2 children went with him to help people who don't get any medical attention. So my kids all learned how to give back to the community. And my son, it's very, very obvious, you know, with the medical field, you know, to make that kind of a difference. So I feel two of my daughter's friends decided they want to go to Jamaica. And I seen them and they said, "You don't know what a son you have." I said, "Thank you for letting me know." But, you know, seeing my son doing so much for the communities all over the world, not only, and he works over here also in areas where people don't have enough medical attention.
Could you share the names of your children?
Of course. My oldest one is Rodney Yisroel Brettler. My second one is Jeffrey Shmuel. My older daughter is Linda Malka Esther, Malka. And my youngest one is Sandra. And both of my daughters ended up keeping their maiden names too, because my older daughter became an architect. And before she got married, she had her license, so she kept her maiden name. And actually, some of my grandkids carry as the middle name, the name of Brettler. And my younger daughter ended up getting a PhD in neuroscience and a postdoctorate. And she decided she doesn't like research, and she went back to school, and she was teaching 4th and 5th graders as a teacher.
That's wonderful.
It is.
Wonderful.
Oh, and my oldest son is a rabbi.
That's very cool. How long did it take you to tell your children that you were a Holocaust survivor?
My oldest son was 14 years old, and he had very close connection with my father, and they were together one day. And my father asked my son, "I have an anniversary coming up. Can you help me to buy an anniversary gift for your grandma?" And he said, "Sure. How many years are you married?" And my father shared how many years he's married. And my son said, "How is that possible? Mom is older than that." So that was the first time they heard about that my new mother wasn't really my mother. And my oldest son at the time, age 14, he said, "Tell me what other secrets you are hiding." And yeah, so I remember that was the first time the kids found out that, you know, about my story. So they were quite a bit older. And then my daughter we were being interviewed once with one of the radio stations. And they asked her, "When did your mother open up about it?" She said it took her a long time, but now she can't stop talking about it.
Talking about the present, have you ever returned to your home country? And have you been able to go back to the camps and see all of that?
The last time I went to an international child survivor, it was in Prague. And I took my oldest son, who just became a rabbi at the time, a conservative rabbi. And we were in Budapest. And my son was wearing a yarmulke, you know, a skull cap. It has a few names. And a Hungarian woman, you are dressed different than the local population. We were speaking English. And she said it loud in Hungarian, Hitler didn't finish his job. And I said, I'm never returning to Hungary. I'm pretty outspoken, but for some reason, being in Hungary and hearing the Hungarian, it brought back so much memories. I didn't say anything to her, but that was my final visit. I did go the same year. I went to see Theresienstadt, which is next to, not far from Prague, in the Czech Republic. And I have been asked with Jewish Family Service, and quite a few organizations asked me if I would go, and I declined. For me to see, both of my grandmothers were cremated in Auschwitz. I had first cousins and aunts, and my late husband's younger brother. I don't need to see it. So I kind of draw the line, and I haven't gone back to those countries for that reason.
How do you cope with modern hatred toward minorities and other marginalized groups based on your experience being?
From very early on, I realized that reaching out is the best way I can handle things. I'm continuously still involved with Holocaust-related places. As a young mother, I was a room mother representative, and I mentioned I was good in math. I used to tutor children who came from all parts of the world and had limited capabilities, and I ended up helping them to master some of, I didn't teach them English, but I did teach them math and chemistry. So that was the way I made a point of making a difference in the local. And my kids all do that on a regular basis. My older daughter is a very, first of all, she's a busy mama of 4 boys, and she volunteers at SOVA, which is giving out food for people who need food, and it gives food for all walks of life. It doesn't matter, you know, what background you come from. So all my kids do that.
Did you ever consider testifying for any Nazi war crime trials? And if so, was there a specific SS soldier or Arrow Cross soldier?
I think you have to realize that they want people, when it comes to testifying, usually, who have more capability of remembering. And the 8-year-old child's memory of what was happening around is a little bit more clouded, because I was being protected by the adults not to understand some of the horrors that was happening around me. So no, I never been asked, and to be honest, I don't think I would like to.
When you went to Austria, when you traveled to Austria and you were connected with the highest agency, was the process from getting from Europe to the US difficult, especially since you were a scientist and had a leg up as opposed to other people?
I wasn't a scientist. I just started to study. I had my 3rd year of, technical school is not on the same level as a university, but I definitely studied science. To be honest, it was such a short time that I was in Austria that I really, My major thing was visiting older people and writing them letters. I really didn't go around to, teach anybody anything. Yeah.
As a woman, did you ever feel restricted from any advancements in the working field, especially when you became a psychologist or studied psychology?
I think from early age on, I was told that I'm going to teach you guys a Yiddish word called dafke, meaning in spite of it. From early age on, I realized that if somebody said you cannot do something, by the way, I can show them they are wrong. So that's my dafke in me. From early age on, I was told at early age on, you won't be able to knit something. I finished knitting it and I showed it to them. The same thing when they told me, you won't amount to anything. I had to show them they are wrong. So I realized that some of the capabilities that I can achieve, it's really up to me. So I never, and in Hungary, men and women were, during the communist era, men and women were encouraged to go to school and study. And when I didn't have the opportunity to go to a gymnasium, I found a different way of going. When somebody told me you cannot do it, I had to show them they are wrong. I think you go ahead.
Oh, no. That was just the time.
So I had not too much restriction, but to be honest, I have been, and both of my daughters really managed to achieve, to become an architect. It wasn't so welcoming, and both of my daughters were pre-med, and since my second son went into medicine, they decided that wasn't their interest, and they found different things to do. And my younger daughter decided to change her major much later age. And I went back to school. I was quite a bit older.
So, in regards to keeping all of these stories alive, how do you feel our generations should do that, and how would you like us to continue doing that?
The first time, before I registered to speak or anything, a friend of mine was speaking in Almonte. It was a grammar school. And I had to make a quick stop after the long drive, and she gave a little information on me. This friend of mine was in hiding, not hiding, in a convent. She is 4 years younger than I am. So before I could listen to her share her story, they put me up and I had to share my story. And when they heard, one young girl, she was 10 at the time, walked up to me and she said, "Can I hug you?" I said, "Of course." She said, "I want you to know my father was just killed. They said that he was part of a gang, which wasn't true. And it was right front of our home. And if you survived at age 8, you give me the encouragement to do it at 10. So that was my opening, and that's when I realized they hear me. And I had people pick me up and drive me, and when they listened to my story, one of them said, "I'm going back to school. You did it at later age, I can do it now." So you can definitely have an effect where people listen to you and they can make difference in their life. And nobody can take it away from you if you are strong enough to stand up for it.
How
I really hope that voices are being heard from all over the world, including I have been on this, speaking to many different group of people, Catholic school, Armenian, and so on. And just recently I had, I think the 4th year that I'm speaking to China, to some students, via Skype, I'm not there. And I think voices throughout the world, different voices we have to hear. And if those voices are being heard, definitely a difference will be made. And I think people, young people and old people, still make an effort to be out in the front and let their voices to be heard. And you will be the next one to share my stories and other stories you will record.
And just one last one. So this is our last question. What is the message you hope people will remember after you share your story?
I really hope then each and every person who hears the story will build up strength in themselves and I really beg them to keep compassion alive and don't allow hatred to enter their life. And as I mentioned before, show compassion, because that's really, when you smile at the person, even as you walk in a restaurant or to a supermarket, it does make a difference. And there are so many people, older people, who are locked in. And if you can go and visit them and just show a little compassion, it really makes a big difference. I hope you heard me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we have officially completed the interview. Thank you. We are grateful to hear your story.
Thank you.
And if anyone has anything else to say, please.
I have a quick question. So, when you were younger, did you listen to any?
Could you speak louder?
Oh, when you were younger, did you have any favorite song that reminded you of when your family was all together, and do you still listen to it now?
From early age on, I loved to go to operas. And in Hungary, to go to opera, it was very expensive. And you had to stand on the top floor. And I could care less as long as I heard the music around me. It was really important. I have a lot of religious songs, which we sing during the holidays, and they kind of embrace me. So, but all in all, like you listen to the song, the Polish, how they call it,
Pledge of Allegiance?
yeah.
Yeah, that one. I know the Hungarian national anthem.
Not the national anthem, it's the Polish people who stood up for the right to be heard. And they have a beautiful song. It's a partisan song. Hallelujah. Yeah, the partisan song. From early age on, I remember hearing it, and it kind of embraced me so much, yeah. Yeah. You had the other question.
Do you remember how it goes, kind of?
Give me a few minutes, it will come.
We'll talk about
Over here, they will tell you.
Anyone else?
La 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 la. and so on.